Elderly CEO told to wait outside by receptionist. Minutes later, he shuts the entire company down. Picture this. The glass doors of Innovatech Solutions whooshed open, releasing Robert Peterson into the sterile hum of the lobby. He paused, the automatic gesture almost comical given the state he was in. Hunched, thinner than a rail, and sporting a cane that looked entirely too new for the ancient tweed suit he wore, he was a far cry from the man who'd last walked through those doors 6 months ago. Chemotherapy had stolen his hair and leached the color from his skin, leaving him looking like a faded photograph. He shuffled towards the reception desk, its polished surface reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights. Tiffany, a vision in a power suit the color of a freshly minted dollar, didn't look up from her computer screen. Robert cleared his throat, the sound raspy and weak. "Excuse me," he managed, the words catching in his throat. Tiffany finally glanced up, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows arching slightly. Her eyes, the color of cold steel, flickered over him, assessing him like a misplaced piece of office furniture. "Yes?" she said, her voice crisp and businesslike, the kind you'd expect from a CEO, not a gatekeeper. Robert straightened as much as his aching back would allow. "I'm Robert Peterson." Tiffany's expression didn't change. No flicker of recognition, no softening of her features. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, He hesitated, suddenly unsure of himself. "I used to work here. I'm back." She tapped a manicured nail against the desk. "I'm afraid I don't see your name in the system. Are you sure you have the right place?" The air in the lobby felt suddenly thick, pressing against Robert's chest. He swallowed, fighting the urge to cough. "I'm quite sure. I am the CEO." Tiffany's lips pursed into a thin line. "I'm sorry, sir, but that's not possible. Mr. Harding took over as CEO 6 months ago. Are you perhaps here for a delivery?" She gestured vaguely towards a side door with a barely perceptible nod of her head. "Deliveries go through the loading dock." Robert's hand tightened on the cane. He could feel the tremor in his fingers. Harding. Of course. He should have known. He forced himself to remain calm, to appeal to the last vestige of decency he hoped she possessed. "Perhaps you could check with Mr. Harding? Tell him Robert Peterson is here." Tiffany sighed, a dramatic sound that suggested she was being greatly inconvenienced. "Mr. Harding is in a meeting. I can't disturb him. Look, sir." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I don't know what you're hoping to achieve, but you're creating a disruption. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The coldness in her eyes was like a physical blow. Robert had spent 30 years building this company, nurturing it, guiding it. And now, he was being dismissed like a beggar at the door. He opened his mouth to protest, but Tiffany cut him off. "Security!" she called out, her voice sharp and carrying through the lobby. "We have a situation." Robert's shoulders slumped. He felt utterly defeated, the fight draining out of him like water from a leaky bucket. He wouldn't make a scene. Not here. Not now. "Fine," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'll wait outside." He turned and slowly, painfully, made his way back to the glass doors, each step an echo of the life he thought he knew, slipping away. Echoes of the past. The autumn air bit at Robert's exposed skin. He pulled his thin jacket tighter, the movement grating against his weakened muscles. Chemotherapy had stolen more than just his hair, it had filched his vitality, leaving him a frail imitation of the man who'd built Innovatech Solutions from the ground up. He leaned heavily on his cane, its rubber tips sinking slightly into the damp earth of the meticulously manicured flower bed outside the building's glass facade. Inside, through the tinted windows, he could see the hive of activity. Employees flitted between desks, their faces illuminated by the cold glow of computer screens. He tried to reconcile the scene with the vibrant, collaborative environment he'd envisioned. Back then, it was all whiteboard sessions fueled by passion and late-night pizza, not this. This felt sterile, corporate, soulless. He remembered the early days, crammed into a single, rented office space above a laundromat. The air thick with the smell of detergent, and the electric buzz of their shared ambition. They'd argued fiercely, debated every line of code, but there was an undercurrent of camaraderie, a shared belief in their mission. Now, looking at the identical workstations, the identical expressions of polite disinterest, he wondered where that spark had gone. A wave of weariness washed over him. He needed to sit. He lowered himself gingerly onto a nearby bench, its cold metal a stark contrast to the lingering warmth of the sun. As he settled, he overheard fragments of conversation drifting from the open doorway. Completely unrealistic deadlines. A woman's voice, sharp and laced with frustration. Management's pushing us to cut corners again. A man's voice, weary and resigned. Promised bonuses haven't materialized. The woman again, her tone hardening. Robert closed his eyes, the voices a discordant chorus confirming his worst fears. The culture he'd so carefully cultivated, the ethos of innovation and integrity, had been eroded, replaced by something transactional. Profit over people, it seemed. He flinched inwardly. He'd always believed in the opposite. He heard the clatter of someone dropping a metal water bottle. Honestly, I'm starting to look elsewhere, the man said, his voice now carrying a distinct note of bitterness. This place isn't what it used to be. Robert's knuckles whitened as he gripped his cane. Wasn't what it used to be. The words echoed in his mind, each syllable a painful reminder of his failure. He'd entrusted his company to capable hands, believing they would safeguard his vision. Instead, they'd allowed it to wither, to become something unrecognizable. The disappointment was a bitter pill, harder to swallow than any chemotherapy drug. He opened his eyes, the vibrant autumn colors of the surrounding trees now seeming muted, almost mocking. The sun dipped further behind the building, casting long, ominous shadows. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that he couldn't stand by and watch his life's work crumble. Something had to be done. Seeds of doubt. The fluorescent lights hummed, a monotonous drone that amplified the hollowness in Robert's chest. He stared at the spreadsheet on his monitor, the numbers blurring into an abstract representation of everything Innovatech had become, a relentless pursuit of profit, divorced from the ethical innovation he'd envisioned. He remembered the garage. The smell of soldering iron and burnt coffee, the chaotic energy of late nights fueled by youthful idealism. David, Sarah, and him, huddled around a rickety table, sketching designs on napkins, fueled by the belief that they could change the world. They weren't in it for the money, not then. They wanted to solve problems, create solutions that improved lives. The early years were a struggle, a constant battle against doubt and dwindling resources, but the passion kept them going. He sacrificed everything. His marriage, his health, even his peace of mind. Now, looking at the projected profits for Q3, a bitter taste coated his tongue. The numbers were impressive, undeniably so. Record-breaking, actually. But at what cost? He knew the corners they'd cut, the environmental regulations they'd skirted, the smaller companies they'd crushed. David had warned him, years ago, as the company grew beyond their control. "We're becoming what we swore to fight, Rob," he'd said, his voice heavy with disappointment. Robert hadn't listened, blinded by ambition, convinced he could steer the ship back on course. He'd been wrong. He rubbed a hand over his bald head, the chemotherapy having stolen his once thick hair. He barely recognized himself. Gaunt, weakened, a ghost of the man he used to be. But his mind, though weary, was clearer than it had been in years. He saw the rot that had infected Innovatech, the disease that was consuming its soul. He closed his eyes, picturing Sarah's face, her bright smile, her unwavering belief in their mission. He felt a pang of guilt, sharp and intense. He'd betrayed her vision, betrayed their shared dream. She would have been appalled by what Innovatech had become. A wave of nausea washed over him, but this time, it wasn't the chemo. It was the realization that he was complicit. He'd allowed it to happen. He'd prioritized growth over integrity, profit over purpose. He opened his eyes, the resolution hardening within him. He couldn't undo the past, but he could control the future. He could dismantle what he had created, tear down the edifice of greed and corruption. The thought, once unthinkable, now felt liberating. He reached for the phone, his hand trembling slightly. He had a lot of calls to make. Difficult calls. Calls that would change everything. He picked up the receiver. A seed of doubt, planted long ago, had finally blossomed into a bitter, resolute certainty. It was time to prune the tree before it poisoned the entire forest. A fateful call. The phone felt heavy in Robert's trembling hand. He stared at the number, a familiar sequence ingrained in his memory. Art Thompson, his lawyer, his friend. He hadn't spoken to Art in months, not since before the sickness truly took hold. He pressed the call button. The ringing seemed to echo in the sterile silence of his office, a space that now felt alien. He hadn't even bothered to unpack his briefcase. A single framed photo of his late wife, Sarah, sat on the otherwise bare desk, a silent witness. "Thompson and Davies, this is Susan speaking. How may I direct your call?" Robert cleared his throat, the sound raspy. "Susan, it's Robert Peterson. Is Art available?" There was a slight pause. "Mr. Peterson? I'll see if he's free. One moment, please." He could practically hear the question mark in Susan's tone. He knew he sounded different, looked different. 6 months of chemotherapy had ravaged him, leaving him a gaunt shadow of his former self. He imagined Susan's raised eyebrows, the hushed whispers that would follow this call. "Robert! Good to hear from you, though I must say you sound different." Art's voice, warm and reassuring, filled the line. It was a balm to Robert's frayed nerves. "Different is an understatement, Art," Robert said, a weak chuckle escaping his lips. "Listen, I need your help. I need you to prepare the paperwork for the immediate closure of Innovatech Solutions." Silence hung heavy on the line. Robert could practically see Art's brow furrowing. "Robert, are you sure about this? That's quite a decision. What's happened?" Robert inhaled deeply, the stale office air stinging his lungs. "I can't go into all the details right now, Art. Just trust me on this. It needs to be done, and it needs to be done quickly. I want all assets liquidated, all contracts terminated, all operations ceased. As soon as possible." Art didn't press him, a testament to their long-standing relationship. He knew Robert wouldn't make such a drastic decision lightly. "All right, Robert. I trust you. But understand, this is a complex undertaking. There will be legal ramifications, employee severance packages, shareholder agreements. We need a solid plan." "I know, Art. I'm relying on you to navigate all that. I'll be in your office first thing in the morning with all the relevant documents. I have a list prepared. Just be ready for a fight. There will be people who won't be happy about this. I'm always ready for a fight, Robert. Especially when I believe in my client. Get some rest, old friend. You sound exhausted." "And Robert..." Art paused. "Welcome back." Robert hung up the phone, the weight of the decision settling upon him like a physical burden. He looked around the empty office, the muted gray walls reflecting his own despair. He had spent years building Innovatech, pouring his heart and soul into it. Now, he was about to tear it all down. He pulled Sarah's photo closer, his fingers tracing the outline of her smiling face. "I'm doing this for you, my love," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "I promise you, I'm making it right." Oblivious to the storm, Tiffany hummed a saccharine pop song as she navigated the maze of cubicles, her heels clicking a brisk rhythm against the sterile office floor. The brief kerfuffle downstairs with the strange, disheveled old man had already faded into the background noise of her ambition. No need to dwell on the insignificant. She had spreadsheets to conquer and promotions to pursue. She settled into her ergonomic chair, adjusted the monitor to the perfect angle, and logged into her computer. The familiar glow of the screen was a comforting beacon in the dull, fluorescent-lit landscape of the office. Another day, another dollar, another step closer to that corner office with the panoramic view. "Hey, Tiffany!" Brenda's voice, a chirpy soprano, cut through the low hum of the office. Brenda, with her perpetually permed hair and collection of cat-themed mugs, was Tiffany's office confidante, the recipient of carefully curated snippets of Tiffany's life. Tiffany swiveled her chair, offering Brenda a dazzling smile. Brenda! What's the gossip? Brenda leaned conspiratorially close, her voice dropping to a stage whisper. Did you see Mr. Harrison's face when Carol from accounting told him she was leaving? Priceless! Tiffany feigned interest, nodding along as Brenda recounted the drama of Carol's resignation. Internal politics were fascinating, primarily because they offered opportunities to demonstrate her own superior performance and loyalty. Speaking of leaving, Brenda continued, sipping from a mug adorned with a picture of a grumpy-looking Persian. Did you hear about the old guy downstairs earlier? Security escorted him out. Said he was causing a scene. Tiffany remembered the man, the one with the kind, but undeniably weathered face. Oh, him? Probably just some disgruntled customer. Happens all the time. Security handled it, right? She dismissed the incident with a wave of her hand. Brenda shrugged. Yeah, but he looked intense. Like he was about to explode or something. Tiffany chuckled, a brittle, dismissive sound. People get intense, Brenda. Especially old people. Now, tell me more about Mr. Harrison. I heard he's been eyeing my latest proposal. Think I have a shot at leading that new project? Brenda launched into a detailed analysis of Mr. Harrison's perceived biases and office rivalries, her words painting a vivid picture of corporate maneuvering. Tiffany listened intently, filing away each piece of information for later use. Outside, the sky was darkening, the cheerful blue replaced by a bruised purple. The wind howled, rattling the windows of the skyscraper, a symphony of impending chaos that none of them seemed to notice. The weather forecast, blaring on a muted television screen in the break room, showed a swirling mass of red and orange engulfing the city. But inside, the fluorescent lights hummed, the keyboards clicked, and the gossip flowed, a self-contained ecosystem oblivious to the storm gathering on the horizon. Tiffany, lost in the labyrinthine world of office politics, was the eye of the hurricane, serenely unaware of the devastation about to unfold. Return with a purpose. The revolving doors whispered shut behind them, sealing Robert and Art inside Innovatech Solutions. The fluorescent hum felt louder than Robert remembered, the air thicker, laced with the sharp citrus scent of the cleaning fluid Tiffany favored. He leaned a little heavier on Art, the lingering chemo fatigue a stubborn companion. The receptionist, a young woman with meticulously sculpted eyebrows, blinked, her painted lips parting in a silent O. She hadn't been there before, or perhaps he just didn't register her the first time. Can I help you? She asked, her voice carefully neutral. Robert Peterson to see everyone. Robert rasped, his voice catching in his throat. He hadn't used it much in the last 6 months. Art stepped forward, his presence a solid wall of calm beside Robert's fragility. We need to call an all-hands meeting. Immediately. He produced a business card, placing it on the polished surface. Arthur Thompson, with Thompson and Davies. I represent Mr. Peterson. The receptionist's eyebrows climbed higher. An all-hands? I'll need to check with Ms. Miller. She reached for the phone, her fingers fluttering over the buttons. No need, Robert said, a surprising steel entering his voice. I'll inform Ms. Miller myself. He straightened, drawing on a reservoir of strength he hadn't known he possessed. The weight of his purpose felt heavier than any illness. He moved towards the elevators, Art a silent shadow at his side. A ripple of whispers followed them. He could feel the collective gaze of the office workers, a palpable weight on his thinning hair. Faces peered from cubicles, curiosity and apprehension warring in their expressions. He saw Tiffany's office door was open. Perfect. Tiffany was on the phone, her voice a saccharine drone of corporate platitudes. She gestured vaguely towards a chair as Robert approached, never breaking her gaze from the screen. Just looping back to make sure we're all aligned on the Q3 deliverables. She chirped into the receiver. Robert didn't wait. He reached over, silencing the phone with a sharp click of the disconnect button. Tiffany's head snapped up, her carefully applied makeup cracking slightly with her surprise. Robert? What in God's name? Her eyes widened, taking in his gaunt frame, the absence of hair beneath the baseball cap. Recognition dawned, followed by a swift, calculating assessment. Pity, then dismissal, flickered across her face. "We need the conference room, Tiffany," Robert said, his voice gaining strength. "Now. All employees. 10 minutes. Robert, I don't understand." She started to bluster, a carefully constructed facade of authority beginning to crumble. "I need to know what's going on, and I'm not sure you're in a position to make demands. Frankly, you look—" Art stepped forward, his voice a low rumble. "Ms. Miller, I assure you, Mr. Peterson is in a perfectly valid position to make these demands. It would be in everyone's best interest to comply." He offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Tiffany's gaze flickered between Robert's unwavering stare and Art's implacable expression. The carefully constructed calm of the office was fracturing, replaced by a palpable sense of unease. A prickle of fear, cold and sharp, began to bloom in her chest. Something was terribly wrong. She swallowed hard. "Fine," she said, her voice tight. "But you'll explain everything afterwards." Robert simply nodded. The time for explanations would come soon enough. The hammer falls. The fluorescent lights of the conference room hummed, a discordant symphony accompanying the nervous shuffling of feet. Tiffany Miller smoothed down her pencil skirt, the movement sharp and precise, betraying none of the anxiety churning in her stomach. She'd positioned herself strategically, near the front, ready to absorb whatever pronouncements Robert Peterson was about to deliver. Rumors had been swirling ever since his return. Whispers of mergers, whispers of downsizing. Tiffany intended to be on the right side of whatever axe fell. The doors creaked open. A collective intake of breath rippled through the room. Robert Peterson. But not the Robert Peterson they remembered. The man who stood before them was gaunt, his skin papery thin, his once sharp blue eyes now clouded. Chemotherapy had stolen more than just his hair. It had stolen his vitality, leaving a fragile shell in its wake. He leaned heavily on a polished cane, its silver head glinting under the harsh lights. Beside him, a reassuring presence, stood Art Thompson. His face was a mask of professional calm, but a muscle ticked in his jaw. He carried a thick file, the weight of its contents palpable. Robert cleared his throat, the sound raspy and weak. He gripped the podium with a trembling hand. "Good morning," he managed, his voice a strained whisper that was amplified by the microphone. The room held its breath. "I asked you all here today, because I have an announcement to make." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the sea of faces. Tiffany met his eyes, offering a practiced, sympathetic smile. He didn't seem to see her. His gaze was distant, haunted. "Innovatech Solutions," he continued, the words gaining a sliver of strength, "will be ceasing operations, effective immediately." A stunned silence descended. Then, a wave of murmurs, questions, and choked gasps erupted. Tiffany's carefully constructed composure cracked. "What?" she blurted out, the word sharp and incredulous. Robert raised a hand, silencing the room. "The decision," he said, his voice firm now, fueled by something deeper than physical strength, "was not made lightly. But it is necessary." He looked directly at the employees, his eyes holding a depth of sorrow that silenced their protests. This company has lost its way. It has become a breeding ground for ambition without ethics, for profit without purpose. The values on which it was founded, innovation, integrity, collaboration, have been betrayed." He paused, his gaze lingering on a cluster of junior programmers near the back. "I returned here hoping to find a way to salvage what we built. But what I found was a toxic environment, driven by greed and selfishness. I cannot, in good conscience, allow it to continue." Art Thompson stepped forward, placing a hand on Robert's arm. "Severance packages will be distributed. HR will be available to answer your questions. I urge everyone to remain calm and professional during this difficult transition." Tiffany felt a cold dread creep up her spine. Severance packages? Transition? Her meticulously planned career trajectory was crumbling before her eyes. She spotted Brenda from accounting wiping away tears. Around her, the conference room had descended into controlled chaos. Lawyers were already moving among the employees, handing out documents. Robert Peterson looked out at the wreckage of his life's work, his face etched with a profound sadness. The hammer had fallen. And with it the dreams, the ambitions, and the futures of everyone in that room. Aftermath and regret. The air in the conference room hung thick, a miasma of disbelief and dawning dread. Robert, gaunt and somehow smaller than usual, stood at the head of the table, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge. Around him, faces ranged from stunned silence to outright weeping. Tiffany Miller stared at the floral pattern on the carpet, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The muffled sobs of Susan from accounting punctuated Robert's halting sentences. "I understand this is devastating news," Robert said, his voice raspy. He cleared his throat. "And I take full responsibility. The decision to close Peterson Innovations was mine, and mine alone." He proceeded to outline the severance packages, which, to Tiffany's surprise, were extraordinarily generous. 3 months' salary, extended health benefits, and outplacement services. It was more than fair, more than anyone could have expected, given the circumstances. A murmur of reluctant gratitude rippled through the room, a counterpoint to the lingering sorrow. Art Thompson, his usually jovial face etched with concern, placed a hand on Robert's arm. "Perhaps a break, Robert?" he suggested quietly. Robert shook his head. "I need to finish this," he insisted. He looked directly at the assembled employees, his gaze lingering for a moment on Tiffany. "I want you all to know that I truly value each and every one of you. I hope you can take this opportunity, this abrupt change, and learn from it. Use it to grow." As the meeting broke, Tiffany remained rooted to her spot. The room emptied slowly, leaving only a handful of stragglers. She watched Art guide Robert out, his arm a steadying presence. Then, Susan approached, her eyes red and swollen. "Tiffany," she said, her voice thick with emotion. I can't believe it. All gone." Tiffany mumbled something unintelligible, avoiding Susan's gaze. She could feel the weight of Susan's grief, the weight of everyone's grief, pressing down on her. Later, alone in her cubicle, the fluorescent lights buzzing mockingly overhead, Tiffany replayed the morning's events in her head. The rushed coffee, the impatient tapping, the condescending dismissal of the elderly man in the lobby. It wasn't just about the receptionist, she realized with a sickening lurch. It was her own ambition, her relentless drive that had blinded her to everything else. She had been so focused on climbing the ladder, on impressing Robert, on securing her future, that she had forgotten the basic tenets of human decency. The severance package, so generous, felt like a brand now. It was a constant reminder of her culpability. It wasn't just a job she'd lost. It was a part of herself, a vital piece of her integrity that had crumbled under the pressure of her own ambition. The floral pattern on the carpet from the conference room swam into her mind, the image of Robert standing there, so beaten, so accepting. He wanted them to learn and grow. She knew what she had to do. The realization settled heavy in her stomach, a cold stone of regret. This wouldn't be erased easily. Empty desks, bitter closure. The exodus had begun before dawn, a silent, gray tide flowing out of the Zenith Tower. By late afternoon, the silence was almost absolute, broken only by the hum of the building's weary ventilation system. Robert stood at his panoramic window, a gaunt silhouette against the bruised twilight sky. Below, the city lights flickered on, indifferent to the darkness that had settled inside these walls. He watched the last few stragglers emerge, heads bowed, clutching cardboard boxes filled with the detritus of their working lives, framed photos, desk plants, staplers. Each box was a miniature coffin, burying dreams, ambitions, and years of dedication. He felt a pang of guilt, sharp and sudden, but it was quickly swallowed by the larger, dull ache of necessity. The weight in his chest hadn't lifted. Making the decision to close Zenith wasn't easy, but the alternative, letting it bleed slowly to death, taking everyone down with it, was unthinkable. He'd chosen the quicker, cleaner cut. He turned from the window. The office was a ghost town. Desks sat empty, stripped bare. Computer screens reflected the dim overhead lights like vacant eyes. The air hung thick with the scent of disinfectant and lingering despair. Art appeared in the doorway, his presence a steadying anchor in the swirling chaos. He held 2 steaming mugs. Coffee? Robert managed a weak smile. You're a lifesaver, Art. They sat in the deserted boardroom, the only sound the gentle clink of ceramic on polished wood. Robert took a long sip, the bitterness of the coffee mirroring the taste in his mouth. It's done, then, Art said quietly, stating the obvious. Robert nodded. It is. He ran a hand over his face, feeling the unfamiliar rasp of stubble. He hadn't bothered to shave. What was the point? How are you holding up? Art asked, his gaze unwavering. Robert sighed. I don't know. Numb, mostly. Relieved, maybe, in a strange way. It's like a malignant tumor has finally been removed. It hurt like hell, but at least now there's a chance to heal. Art nodded slowly. Closure is important, Robert. You made a difficult choice, but you made it with integrity. He looked around the room, at the empty chairs, the blank whiteboard, the silent projector. So many meetings, so many deals, so many triumphs and failures had played out within these walls. It was over. I just hope they'll be all right, Robert said, his voice barely a whisper. The employees. I hope they find something better, something that fulfills them. Art placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of quiet reassurance. They will, Robert. They're talented, resilient people. And you gave them a head start, a severance package that most companies wouldn't even consider. Robert met Art's gaze, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and lingering sorrow. Thank you, Art. For everything. For your counsel, your loyalty, your friendship. Art smiled, a genuine, heartfelt expression. Anytime, Robert. Now about that future. What are you going to do with yourself? Robert looked out at the twinkling city lights, a new dawn waiting on the horizon. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of hope. I think, he said slowly, I'm going to learn how to live again.